Hi, I'm Kevin Gentry, and welcome to the TenX Strategies webinar series, where we help great causes like yours transform your effectiveness by 10xing your fundraising. And we do that by hosting guests, accomplished practitioners who work through a lot of their own examples and successes of how they've been able to raise more funds in a way, hopefully, that you can take these lessons and apply them to your own good work. If you want to learn more, check out our website, tenxstrategies.com. That's tenxstrategies.com. Be sure to take advantage of the free fundraising resources. You can sign up for the free weekly fundraising tip. But for now, take a look at today's webinar. We're so glad to have you. Thanks for being with us.
Well, greetings, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another one of our 10X Strategies special webinars where we dig deeply into a subject that we've been covering recently as part of our weekly fundraising tips. This is Kevin Gentry, your host. It's always good to be with you. Today, we're talking about persuasive storytelling with the best storyteller I've ever known, and that's Bob Ewing, who's coming to us from Durango, Colorado. Bob, it's great to have you. First of all, welcome. Thanks for being here.
Thanks so much, Kevin. I appreciate you're awesome, and I appreciate taking the time to chat with me.
Well, it's been awesome for me to have gotten to know and work with you for many years now. I always benefit even from just our informal conversations, like some of the ones we had at the recent State Policy Network meeting in New Orleans. But Bob, just to kick us off, for the benefit of those who are here, because we want to talk about how storytelling is just so helpful in what we're trying to do in terms of sharing and selling our principles to prospective supporters. Why is storytelling so important?
Yeah. When I do storytelling workshops, I show one slide, one graph. One graph in my slide deck. And the graph is a big circle, and 95% of it is green and 5% of it is red. So if you picture a big circle, if you could picture that in your head and sear that into your brain. There's really good replicated research from Stanford and elsewhere that says that when most people talk, whether it's on stage in a conversation, their audience forgets 95% of what they say within 10 minutes. They forget 95% in 10 minutes. What stories do is they help you to flip that.
Well, Bob, recently, as you may know, just did this podcast with Don Miller, who developed Building a Story brand. He says that about 30% of the time we're daydreaming, whether we're in a presentation, whatever it may be, even in a conversation with somebody else, our brains have us focused somewhere else. So how does story work? Why is it that it melds with our brain and it rivets our attention?
Yeah. No, it's a great question. There's a book called The Storytelling Animal, and the author in that argues that we spend closer to 50% of our time daydreaming. I like to call it traveling to Neverland. And the supposed evolutionary reason for that is that we are trying to go back and fix things that we did in the past so we can do better in the future. It's a mechanism for iteration. We can go back to a conversation, go back to a thing that we acted on and say, how can I do it a little bit better next time? And so traveling backwards can be useful to the extent that we're getting teachable moments and then applying them in the future. They're not good if we're in a conversation and instead of listening or being fully present, we're off somewhere else.
All right. Can you give an example of a story of any kind, one of your favorites, that everybody listening can kind of get the gist of why this stuff works so effectively?
Sure. And we could go in a lot of different directions with this. What I will say is another reason to tell compelling stories isn't just so people remember what you say, but it's so you can get your big ideas into your audience's head. Right. And if we go all the way back to Aristotle, when he said to effectively connect with people, and he's the father of logic, he said you need several different ingredients in your communication. And we know three of the big ones he said were logos, ethos, and pathos. Logos is your logic, facts, figures, statistics. Ethos is your status, your credibility, and pathos is putting the audience in the correct frame of mind so they're willing to listen to you. Right. And so normally what especially academics and folks that are immersed in ideas do is they spend a lot of time in that logos bucket talking about ideas. But ideas are abstract and they don't stick. Aristotle was the father of logic, and he said to make your ideas stick, you need the pathos, put the audience in the correct frame of mind. And so I like to use the analogy of giving an animal medicine. When you give an animal medicine, you don't want a big pill with nothing else. They're not going to take it. You want a little pill, and you want to wrap it in a hot dog or cheese or something tasty. That's what stories do, right? And so you want your idea compressed to something as simple to hear and simple to understand as like a proverb, and you want that wrapped in something that people understand, like a story. Now, I'll give you an example of a story that I like to share to drive that home, right? So you and I both worked at Mercatus.
Yes, we did. By the way, we worked in a lot of similar organizations and
Yeah.
allied organizations and the same organizations. And by the way, I want to jump in here. Barbara Hertzinger jumped into chat immediately and said, wow, I have friends in Durango when I was just there. And you were just explaining to me that Durango is in the middle of nowhere and it's very tiny. We'll come back to that in a minute, but let's give me an example of a story that you think has resonated well and it might resonate with folks today.
Yes. 2 weeks about after I started working at Mercatus, I was told that I'm going to be facilitating a conversation at the Willard Hotel.
And this
Now,
is the Mercatus Center at George Mason University, just outside of
yes.
Washington, D.C., the world's premier market-oriented research and think tank.
Nice, excellent. Yes, right. And so this is a big deal because the Willard Hotel, in a town full of incredible hotels, this may be the most amazing hotel at all, right? It's known as the residence of presidents. Every president spent time there. Many have lived there. I did research on it. I was nervous even walking in because General Grant would sit in the lobby and drink his brandy, and people would come talk to him. Like I walk in there and I'm imagining like Walt Whitman walking by and Mark Twain. It's where Dr. King and his team wrote the I Have a Dream speech. It's where Battle Hymn of the Republic was written. I mean, it's such an iconic place. And so I walk up to the second floor and I walk into this room, closed door meeting, one table, it's a dinner. One table, I'm sitting around with a dozen other people. Two of them are incumbent US senators. There's heads of commissions, there's really high status DC folks here. My job is to facilitate this conversation, right? To make sure that no one's hogging the ball, that everyone has a chance to participate. And I notice there's one senator that's spending a lot of time talking, as politicians often do, and the guy to my right isn't saying anything. And about halfway through the dinner, I wonder, how can I include him, or is he just really scared? And finally, the conversational ball lands in his lap, and he absolutely knocks it out of the park. And so the senator leans in and asks him another question. He knocks it out of the park. And then this head of a commission asks him a question, and people are leaning in and asking him questions, and he is just putting on a clinic. The rest of the dinner was this guy putting on a masterclass. When the dinner ended, normally, you know what this is like. Normally, people gather around the senator or whoever, like the perceived highest status person is. They all gathered around this guy, right? And just kept asking him questions. It blew my mind. When finally everyone left, he and I got to walk out together. And his name was Adam Thier, and he was a scholar at Mercatus. Now he's at R Street. And I said to him, I said, how did you do that? And his answer was so good, I will never forget it. And it has become a core part of what we teach at our company, the Ewing School. He said, like 5 words. He said, I save my best stories. And that's it. I save my best stories. It's so common sense. And so I said, tell me more. He says, well, I've been doing research for over 20 years on a whole bunch of different stuff, and it's complicated. A lot of it's this complicated tech stuff, and people don't naturally understand it. So I come up with the best stories to help explain these, and I save them into a document in the cloud. And I also save analogies and big ideas that I like to call proverbs, or you take your big ideas and you condense them down to these jargon-free insights, right? Proverbs are timeless wisdom, not banal talking points, but timeless wisdom. So he says, I have these stories and proverbs and analogies saved in this document in the cloud. And before I go talk to someone, I just pull it up and flip through, and I think, what would be most useful for them? I said, how much time did you spend preparing for this conversation, for this dinner? And he said, well, I don't know, how long is the Lyft ride from Mercatus to the Willard? It's like, I don't know, 7 minutes maybe. And that was it, right? If you do this, if you actually save your best stories and have them available, it's like starting every conversation, every presentation off with a completely unfair advantage.
All right, Bob, this is awesome because you're already getting into practical application for this, which is what we wanted to make sure we covered today. So
Yeah,
good. And you told a good story within an explanation of the story. So that was awesome. You had an element of drama and you had us going and waiting for the answer. So I have a couple questions related to that, but I want to invite
100%.
folks who are listening and joining to put questions into the chat or the Q&A, and I'll try to monitor it too, because we want this to be fully interactive. But if you wouldn't mind, tell us a little bit more. Are there some different story frameworks? Are there some, what are some, what, why does this work? And so what exactly was Adam trying to accomplish with his inventory of stories?
Yes. So a lot of directions we could take that. Your question, if you says, why does it work? We could get into the science behind storytelling. And if you say, what are the ingredients or the structures for stories, that would be different. I'll start with the structure and the ingredients, because I think at this point, most people agree with us that stories are important. I went back
Yeah.
and looked at our notes, and I saw the first time you and I chatted in a recorded conversation was back in 2016. And my notes from that conversation, I really focused on the why, on here's the philosophy and the science behind it. And I think at this point, about a decade later, people agree with us.
I
And so,
agree with you. I think you're exactly right, and would look to the affirmation of folks as part of this webinar. I agree. 10 years ago, it was kind of like, but now everybody's like, okay, I know stories are important. I don't understand exactly the why, but I know they're important. You've convinced me, and now I want to do it. And I think,
yeah,
frankly, and we wanted to cover this as much as possible today, most people really struggle. In fact, many people think an anecdote is a story. And as we know from that famous line of planes, trains, and automobiles, and that intense conversation between Steve Martin and John Candy, an anecdote is not a story. So
yes.
keep going, Bob.
And I will say, in the universe that you and I live in, and I think most of the folks listening to us live in, that is the number one biggest thing. Is that we hear that we're supposed to tell stories, and then we share summaries and anecdotes. And so I will say, based on my 20 plus years of research and trench work doing this stuff, I've come up with 5 simple ingredients that we coach and teach our clients to internalize and apply for good stories. There's a
And by the way,
thousand
to be
different.
clear, Bob, you have taken what you had learned and then applied at Mercatus and Institute for Justice and other places, and now you have the Ewing School where you actually teach this.
Yeah.
And you do a phenomenal job, and I know so many groups benefit from that. Don't want to forget that at the end either. So, but that kind of credentials you to make this argument.
Nice,
We're
thank
just
you.
not interviewing you because you have your own opinions about stories. You have a proven track record, but keep going, keep going.
Yeah. So I will say, what we want to do with stories is there are 5 basic ingredients. And if you can apply these basic ingredients, you don't have to have all of them, but if you could keep them in mind, that they are what help to create the magic. And so here's the 5 ingredients. The first is vivid. And by vivid, I mean you help your audience to see. We recently ran a private storytelling webinar for some folks, and Virginia Prostrel showed up. And she's, Virginia, she's just absolutely iconic. I was honored to have her join our story lab. And people were asking, how can I be as good at you at telling stories? And this is what she said. She said, you have to make your audience see what you're talking about. Vivid, 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 vivid. Help people to see. Concrete, not abstract. Academics love to talk in abstractions. Be vivid. Every good story that you remember, going back thousands of years, pick up any book that has survived more than 100 or 1,000 years, the Bhagavad Gita, the New Testament, the Iliad, whatever it may be. The stories in there will be vivid, right? So vivid, emotional. Emotional means I help people to care. I want people to care. And the best way to do that is to tell real stories about real people. Robert McKee wrote one of the iconic books in storytelling called Story. He runs clinics where Hollywood Academy Award winners and all big documentary folks go to Robert McKee camps. And he says, when you're telling a story, it's not just a narrative arc, it's an emotional arc. Think about what you want them to feel and how you want that to change. Right? So vivid emotional simulation. This is the hardest one for our clients. A simulation is not a summary. You are bringing us to a moment. You're bringing us to a moment where we're sitting around a table on the second floor of the Willard. It's not logical, it's moments. I want to be at a moment and then another moment, right? Vivid emotional simulation. Simulation is not a summary. You're bringing us to moments where we experience. You're helping people to experience. This is why video games and movies and novels are so compelling, because we are immersed in simulations. Vivid emotional simulations, dialogue. You don't have to have this. Not every story will have a dialogue, but if you can add just a drip of dialogue, it helps us to hear and it helps us to bring it to life. I said to him, "How did you do that?" And he said, "I save my best stories." Just a little bit of dialogue helps, right? And then finally, some type of an arc. And we could dive into this if you want. There's thousands of templates on arcs. If you go to my Substack, Talking Big Ideas, I have a free piece up there called How to Structure What You Say. And it's five absolutely gold standard templates to instantly elevate every conversation presentation you have, every story that you're delivering. The two that are most important, I think, for clients to understand for us is what we call the linked narrative and the persuasive narrative. And we can dive into that if you want, but you want some type of an arc. So those are the 5 core ingredients: is vivid emotional simulations, ideally with a drip of dialogue and some sort of an arc. That's the big 5. Now, we don't tell stories just for fun or to entertain. So there's an extra ingredient, and it's the whole purpose of storytelling. And that is the moral, right? So if you think of Aesop, like Aristotle idolized Aesop. Aesop wasn't just a kid's writer. He was someone who took complex ideas, distilled them to timeless wisdom, like a proverb, and embedded them in stories. That's the model. That's the model. Our reason to tell stories isn't to entertain. It's to inspire action. It's to do whatever it may be, to get people to act, to get people to be motivated, to get people to be inspired. Whatever your reason is, it's probably not just to entertain. Therefore, every story should have a moral. The reason that you tell stories is to embed your proverb into their brains. The reason that I told the Adam Thier story isn't because it's a fun story that's entertaining. It's because it's a great way to embed the proverb, the big idea I want to accept into your audience's minds, which is start your story library today. If you want to be a compelling storyteller, you need to build a catalog of stories that are available for you to draw from.
All right. I want you to talk about building your library of stories. But before that,
Mhm.
just as an example, if you don't mind, if you remember this, I was scrolling through some social media posts and immediately I caught what caught my eye was a story you were telling. And I went to the end of the story and I couldn't help myself but react and even comment on your story because you had pulled me in. And I thought about the contrast because I can scan stuff. It's a lot of
Mhm.
stuff. And it could be facts and figures, or it could be, me that comes across and whatever it is. But you pulled me in immediately and I was kind of, just transformed by it and boom, I acted. I don't know whether you remember that story. It was one you did recently. It may have been about Leonard Reed. But
Yeah.
just give us an example of how you utilize that as in the course of what you're trying to achieve.
Yeah, so whether I'm writing or speaking or in conversations, I always prepare in advance. And I'll think, even if it's a conversation with your spouse or with a friend, if you take 30 seconds and prepare, you will be exponentially further ahead. And so what I'll do is I'll think through, like, what do I want to communicate? And what do I think they want to communicate? And then how can I bring my thing to life? How can I take what I want to say, distill it to something as simple as a proverb, and then wrap it, like Aristotle would say, in something that's appealing? And so for that piece that you read, that was a piece about that. This was coming shortly after the Charlie Kirk assassination, and there's all of this even more division than normal in our country, and we're so lacking pluralism. And this is one of the core principles for me and for our company, is to say, how can we defend the most important principles of human flourishing. And pluralism is so core to this. And so I wrote a piece on pluralism. Now, I didn't want to just start with abstract philosophy on pluralism matters. And we could go back to John Stuart Mill and see, right? Because people don't quite, we start to tune out. So it's how do I apply these basic ingredients? And so what I did was I used a news hook, which was Leonard Read's birthday. And now, granted, the New York Times probably doesn't care, but I do, and it's my Substack, right? And so I start with Leonard Read's birthday, and then I leave that. So now it's like, oh, wait, are we coming back to that? And then I tell a story about myself and my father-in-law and my wife in a faraway land in South America. And I start to tell that story, but I don't finish that. So then again,
What was that story?
so that story was about being a stranger in a strange land. And so my wife and I decided that what we would do is, with all four of our parents, is we would take each of them wherever they want to go in the world, and it'll just be us, right? And so we'll just take one parent at a time wherever. And so we took her father-in-law to South America. He traveled all over the world, but he hadn't gone there. And so we arrive in, so we go to Valparaiso, which is literally in the middle of nowhere. Now, Mary Rose's father is a third generation cattle rancher from Montana. So he knows the mountains. So we went to a faraway ocean town, right? And so we get in the cab, and we don't speak Spanish and he doesn't speak English. And so we figure out how to navigate to this place that we're staying in this small town out in Chile, in South America. And we're winding down these narrow roads, and we get into this alley, and we go down this alley that's super narrow to the very end of it. And you could see the ocean there. We get out and you could smell the salt and the breeze, and it's just fantastic. We get our bags out, we pay him, and he backs up this very narrow road because he can't turn, right? He backs all the way up. We watch him disappear. And we're standing there and we're so excited. And that's when we look down at our bags, and I see that one bag is missing. And it's the bag with my laptop and my journals and my passport. And my heart absolutely sinks. It's like, oh my God. And I go running down that alley, and he's gone. And there's people standing along the side of the alleyway looking at me, just confused. I can't speak their language. They can't speak mine. And I'm just standing in the street, just completely just terrified and just embodying this idea of being a stranger in a strange land.
Okay, Stranger in a Strange Land is one of the traditional story arcs. You know, there's the Cinderella story, there's the sort of challenger sales story, but the Stranger in a Strange Land. So, what is, and you get us? You know, we're concerned as you perhaps were. Okay, what did you do? So you've got us right now. What are you doing, and what do you do next?
In terms of storytelling, I want to tell a story that will pull people in. And then now I want to have a moral to the story, right? Now, in this case, I then left that story in the piece that I wrote recently. I left it there. And then I started going into principles, because I want you to be thinking, wait, I want to know the rest of that story. So I want to tell enough of a story that I have your attention. Now I want to drop the morals in, and then I can come back to the story, and I can tell other stories in between, right?
What did you do? How did you continue that?
So I stood there completely helpless for like 2 minutes and thought, oh my God, what am I going to do? And then I see this guy running towards me down the alley. And it was our cab driver, and he had my bag in his hand. And he got up to me, and I hugged him like he was like a long lost grade school buddy. And I pulled out my wallet, and I tried giving him everything in my wallet, and he wouldn't take it. He just smiled at me and gave me my bag. And the people on the street were smiling at us too.
Okay, so there's the happy ending.
Yeah,
but what are you doing here? What is the story? What do we do now? Okay, we're done. All right, I'm ready to move on to something else. You told this Leonard Read thing. What were you doing? What did you why did you use the Valparaiso incident in the story, and what did you try to accomplish?
So for that story, that was just helping to tee up that I know what it's like to feel like I'm a stranger in a strange land, and that oftentimes, even when people feel very different than us, they're often not as different as we feel. Is that people are people, and that we can find ways to connect. Even if we don't agree on the same music or the same morality, we can still find ways to connect and agree to live together in peace and to treat each other with respect.
Okay, so that's the principle. That's the moral you were trying to convey. So you grabbed everybody's attention with you're
Yeah.
losing your stuff in Valparaiso. Bring it back to Leonard Read. What happens at the end? Why did you mention Leonard Read's birthday? What's going on?
Because Leonard Read embodied pluralism. Leonard Read was a philosopher who started in the 1940s the Foundation for Economic Education, one of the great think tanks of this or any country. And what he did was he said, we have to advance the principles that create human flourishing. And there's so much collectivism now that is thwarting those institutions. And so he started FEE in 1946, and baked into the Foundation for Economic Education, or FEE, was this idea of treating people with respect. And his proverb on this was, I will treat everyone as high a grade as I would treat the Lord. And that's it. So there's a great, I worked at FEE. I lived in the FEE mansion before they moved to Atlanta. And I got to be there where Hayek and Ayn Rand and Milton Friedman and all these incredible juggernauts spoke and lectured and interacted. I got to live there. It was incredible.
So you're recommending that we all build a library of stories so we can make a point more effectively.
Okay. So I lived at FEE, and I really got into Leonard Read. Right. And I came across a story when I lived in the FEE mansion up in New York before they moved to Atlanta. And there was a story where Leonard got this super nasty letter from someone. And it was about 2 weeks after he wrote an article that said there is no moral right to strike. And he got a nasty letter from someone on the other side of the country in Washington who organized strikes for a living. So you can imagine why he might be mad that some New Yorkers saying there's no moral right to do his job, right? And so Leonard reads this letter, and it is nasty. He's calling him horrible names and swear words and all sorts of stuff. And I'd like to say to folks, if you were Leonard and you got this letter, what would you do? What Leonard did was he called Ed Opitz into his office. Ed was an economist at FEE and a reverend. And he said, Eddie, I'm going away for a few days. I want you to write this character back, giving him our treatment. And the FEE treatment is to treat everyone as high a grade as you would treat the Lord. Now, you don't have to be religious to understand that basic philosophy. It's the core principle of pluralism. And so Leonard says, Eddie writes this masterpiece. He comes back, he signs his name to it, sends it off. He says, as soon as you can send a letter from the West Coast to the East Coast, right, and back again, he gets the most abject apology. He says this guy was crushed to think he'd written his nasty letter to the kind of person that Ed Opitz had made Leonard out to be, right? So Leonard sends him another letter, and a correspondence starts, and then a friendship. At one point, this man, his name was William, he says, Leonard, I hereby authorize you to be my director of reading. Send me anything that in your estimation will improve my thinking and include a bill. And this is after Leonard had sent him several books for free. And eventually they got together and they were driving in a car. And Leonard says to him, do you remember that first letter you wrote me? And William says, yeah. He says, imagine if I had replied in kind. Would you and I be sharing a car ride right now? And William says, no. And then he cites him an old Arab proverb. He that strikes the second blow starts the fight. He says, William, you struck the first blow. I did not strike the second. You and I are buddies. A few months later, he hasn't heard from William. He wonders what's going on. And finally, he gets a letter. And the letter says, Dear Mr. Reed, I never thought it would happen to me. I bought a new automobile, and I was on the highway, and I had a head-on collision. And I've been in the hospital for the last 3 months as the doctors try to splice me back together. But Leonard, you should see the work that I have done on these doctors on behalf of our philosophy.
Wow. So you're illustrating a phenomenal point about pluralism by Leonard Read on his birthday. Use that as the hook. But you grab people's attention with the stranger in a strange land story of losing your stuff in Valparaiso. You have us kind of hooked. Then you make the point. You deliver the moral of the story, but in a way that's a lot more like popcorn at the movie theater than spinach.
Yes. Yes. Again, if we could think of that visual of the circle, 95%, 5%, right? And we don't want people to forget 95% of what we say. We want them to remember it. And people, we don't have to remember everything about a story. It's just the basic feeling and the basic moral. We want to use stories to incept our big ideas into our audience's brains. The purpose of telling the Leonard Read story is to say that you too can treat people with respect. And it doesn't matter how they treat you. You can live by your code, not theirs. In pluralism, treating different weird people with respect is core to a free and flourishing society.
All right. Okay, Bob. So that's a tremendous illustration. We're at about half an hour. I've got a little bit more time with folks. And again, if anybody wants to add in questions or comments, please continue along. But Bob, just now take this to the practical application, as you hinted at the beginning. Tell us what you would recommend that we do in terms of building that library like Adam had stored in the cloud and could retrieve in his 7-minute Lyft ride from the Mercatus Center to the Willard Hotel.
Yes. Okay. 2 principles that I want everyone to apply. And if you do this, you will achieve transformational growth. I mean, transformational growth, right? We have several clients that have said to us, this has been life-changing for us. And this is something that people all over the world say, right? This is what Warren Buffett said when he learned to tell stories and effectively speak in public. He said, this has been life-changing for me. So did Steve Jobs. So did Milton Friedman and Maya Angelou and so many people, right? This has been life-changing for me. And this is it. Here's the 2 things that will make you completely rise above everyone else. And I've worked with development teams for 20 years, and most of them don't really apply these 2 principles. The first one is to start your story library today. I'm agnostic on what tool you use. We use Notion. You can use a Google Doc. You can use anything. Start today. You can add complexity later. You don't have to write out a story verbatim. Just capture a story. There are 3 types of stories that I encourage you to start sifting through. Personal stories, stories from work, and stories that you love. It doesn't matter what they are, right? The Leonard Read story didn't happen to me. It's just a story that I read in a book, and I was like, I love this story. I want to share it.
By the way, Bob,
Valparaiso.
I would jump in and say I've done this for years just by keeping a notebook. I'm not reliably doing this or as disciplined as I would like, but anytime I hear a good story, which might even be in the form of like a joke or something like that somebody tells at a dinner or something like that, or something that happens or whatever, is you write it down and then you just kind of leaf through it from time to time. That's what I do, and that kind of helps me build the inventory of story. Because that way, kind of like Abraham Lincoln used to do when I think it was in the movie Lincoln, when Seward said, you always have to tell your stories, but he always made these points, and he would like draw from this massive inventory of story to make his point. So I'm sorry, keep going.
I love it. Well, I'm so glad to hear that you're doing this. And yes, I encourage everyone. This is your one thing, is start your story library today. And that's it, right? Now, how do I do it? Well, we could spend lots of time talking about different ways to do it. You could use a physical notebook. You could use a digital notebook. I encourage people to create something in the cloud. So when you're on the Lyft ride over, instead of scrolling your email or social media, flip through your story library, right? And then you could search too. You can have it. So you can search through it.
By the way, that's what Reagan did with his index cards. And we now know he organized them by topic. And one of his favorites was Russian jokes, which were making fun of the Soviet authoritarian system. And he always had something, but it was in his mind. I think he reviewed them, but he always, and people thought he was an effective communicator. But one of the ways he was an effective communicator was that he was a very good storyteller.
Do you remember his story about the Russian and the American that said, in Russia, or and what I love about America is you could walk into the president's office, you could bang your desk on the Oval, or bang your fist on the desk of the Oval Office and say, Mr. President, I don't like the way you're running this country. And the Russian says, oh, we can do that. And the American says, you can? He says, oh, yeah, I can go into the General Commissioner, Kremlin, whatever. I could bang my hand on the desk, and I could say, General Secretary, I don't like the way President Reagan's running his country.
Yes, he was so good. And the Reagan did a great job running them. I keep chuckling at some of them. And he also had the gift of the pregnant pause or the little twinkle in his eye when he'd tell it. I've noticed that you lower your voice a bit when you're telling the story, if you want to comment on that. But again, just tell us a little bit more in terms of how to make all this actionable for all of us,
Okay.
especially in nonprofits and fundraising. How do we do this? And then I have a couple
Okay.
of questions that have popped up that I want to ask
Cool.
as we close out.
Yes. So I'm going to say two things. Two things I encourage everyone to do. One, start building a story library. Use whatever you want. Use whatever tool's most easiest for you to start, but start it now. And you don't have to write out a complete story. Just sketch out a couple things. Steal one of mine. Say Leonard Read's story with William Benz. That can be a story. You can take stories from your personal life, stories from your work life. Oh my God, I love this story that my boss tells, or this founder story, whatever it may be, story of research you're working on, stories that other people are telling at work. And then literally any story that you love. It could be from Star Wars. It could be anything. You figure out later on how you connect morals to them, but make it as simple as possible. Just sketch out in 3 sentences. This story, this story. Start capturing those. Start capturing the stories. And then separately, you're capturing morals to the stories, which we call big ideas. Capture the big ideas, the things you want to communicate, and then slowly work to polish those into proverbs. So you have big ideas, proverbs, and stories. Ideally, they're all captured somewhere in a digital document, and you're slowly building them. Just start now at 0 to 1, and then slowly build up over time. And when you have a little bit of time on your calendar, this is the second thing, is you have to actually practice, because it's worthless if it sits in a bunker or a drawer and you never pull it out. So every week, what I would do with my development team is I would say, all right, I want the stories ideally all somewhere where we can all see each other's story libraries. And I could steal from Kevin, and Kevin can steal from me, and I could steal from Roger, or whatever it may be. And we can share these stories, and then we practice them together. And then crucially, we iterate each time. And the iteration is where the magic happens. That's the compounding growth. Is if I get a little bit better and a little bit better and a little bit better over 100 iterations, I've achieved transformational skill development. That's where the magic happens. And that's how it works in our universe. That's how natural selection creates biological diversity. It's how markets create wealth. It's how engineers build things. It's how all skill develops. It's how we
Wow.
understand science, right? It's you iterate based on feedback. And so you have to block off. If I ran a development team, I would say everyone's story libraries are in the cloud that we can all see, we can share, we can look at each other, we could steal from each other. And every week there is a time that we are practicing them and we're giving each other honest feedback. Here's what you did well, here's how you can iterate. And then every week we're iterating. And over time, you all experience the magic of compound growth.
Yeah, totally. Well, good. Well said. And you effectively articulated that. It's been said that we tend to include too many details in our storytelling, so we'll get better with feedback from others to kind of keep to the main point. But here's some questions that are coming in. One is, can you give an example of how you've used storytelling in nonprofit fundraising?
Yes. And so I work with I've always been on the communication side, right? So I worked at the Institute for Justice for 8.5 years as a comms guy. And then I went to Mercatus and was the head of media. And then I started a training team. And then now I've had my company for about 7 years and we've done training. And so I work with many folks. I work with many executives and I work with many folks in fundraising directly, right? Both the presidents, the executive directors, and different folks in fundraising. And so what we do with all of them, with all of our clients, is we say, how can you be as clear and confident and compelling as possible in the communication that you're doing? And we will build up both big picture, what are the core messaging in stories, in analogies and proverbs that you need to effectively communicate. And then before big events, whether it's a big one-on-one with a donor or a big event where you're on a panel or you're at a networking event, we will run mocks, right? And we'll do this with all of our clients, whether they're arguing cases before the Supreme Court or going and talking to a big donor or going to a big networking event. You actually practice as if you're there. You run mock interviews, mock conversations, mock presentations, and then get feedback. And I always tell clients, you have to show up on round 3. If you're doing a big podcast, what are the questions I'm likely to get? How can you answer them well? And run a couple of reps before you get up there. Don't show up on round 1 to the big donor meeting. Show up on round 3 or more.
All right, good stuff. So in social media, a number of people asked about what if you only have just a couple of seconds? Somebody's busy, or or thinking in terms of social media, or even the beginning of a email or a direct mail package. how do you begin a story, hook a story quickly so that the person is actually going to give you that attention?
And so you could take the same story and tell it in 1,000 different ways. You can have a 30-second version, a 3-minute version, a 5-minute version. And so you want to figure out what's the best context for this particular person. And the more audience focused we are, the better. I always like to say, I quote the tech entrepreneur Ken Hammer, who said, giving a talk without an audience in mind is like writing a love letter and addressing it to whom it may concern. Right? That's a bad love letter. And so you think, in this context, what makes the most sense? And if you're sending an email, it might not make sense to tell a story. Maybe it makes sense to send 3 sentences, right? And so what makes the most sense? Now, in terms of the arc, when I brought up the 5 core story ingredients, I said you should have an arc. There are 1,000 templates. I brought up my piece I wrote called How to Structure What You Say. And one of the gold standard templates in there is just the problem solver, problem, solution, example. What's a problem that my client has? What's a problem that this donor has? How can I help to solve that problem? How can we working together solve that problem? And then what is a concrete, vivid example, which could be a quick story? Problem, solution, example. An extended version of that many of the great speeches in history have done is called the persuasive narrative. And it's just an expanded version of that. But problem, solution, example is very simple. I can get that in your head pretty easy. The persuasive narrative is audience hook, shared vision, problem, solution, call to action. And if you can Google the TED Talk from Nilofer Merchant, it's like 4 minutes long and it is perfect. Her opening sentence, she looks out at the crowd and she says, what you are doing right now at this very moment is killing you. That's such a good audience hook. When Steve Jobs introduced the iPhone, every now and then, a revolutionary product comes along that changes everything. Those are good audience hooks for those specific audiences. And then Nilofer Merchant, to go back to the entrepreneur, audience hook and then shared vision. She says, we all want a world where we're healthy and happy and flourishing. And then problem. The problem is that we're not healthy and happy and flourishing. And part of the reason why is because we sit too much. Sitting is the smoking of our generation. A great analogy. Sitting is the smoking of our generation. Problem. Here's my solution. My solution to you is to sit less and walk more. Here's my call to action. Pick one meeting that you have on your calendar that recurs every week and change it to a walking meeting. Now, I did not prepare to talk about that before you and I got together, but the persuasive narrative is such a simple, clear arc that I can just quickly run through the skeleton of that, and it's very easy. And we want to do that with all of our communication. We don't want to memorize scripts, and stories help us to speak powerfully without scripts. We don't want classical music, we want jazz. Jazz has a structure to it. I start in this key, I move here, I move there, I move there, but I'm liberated to be fully present in the moment and speak to this specific audience in this context. And we've been speaking our entire life. Speaking is natural. What's unnatural is trying to memorize scripts. So stories liberate us with a little bit of structure to powerfully connect with our audience.
Well, a shout out to Scott Hennig from Canada for putting the YouTube clip that you referenced into the chat. Nice. We've got a lot of good fans in the chat. Bob, just close us out with just what advice you would give to any of those. I think we're all convinced that storytelling is important in our work. So what advice, other than just going to the Ewing School and hiring you to improve our effectiveness, what should we be doing?
Yeah. And so these are the 2 things that I just want to sear into everyone's brain. So my proverb, my one core thing that I want to get across is start your story library today. That's it. If you give me a second one, it is carve out space every week to practice and iterate. The iteration is the magic. And so I would bake it into the fabric of the development team that you work on. And everyone gets together and practices and gives feedback. In feedback, I would structure where as soon as someone's done speaking, have them tell a story, 1 to 3 minutes. Then they have to give a self-assessment. And the self-assessment has to start with positives. Here's what I did well. Here's what I can do to take it to the next level. And you could just use the 5 ingredients I talked about. Were you vivid? Were you emotional? Did you tell a simulation? Did you have any dialogue? Did you create some sort of an arc? And then go back and forth. Start with self-assessment. Here's what I did well. Here's how I can do better. Then get feedback from the team. And the team start with positives. Here's what they did well. And honest. Here's what I honestly think you did well. And here's what I honestly think you could do to take it to the next level. If you did these 2 things, if you started your story library today and you add to it regularly, and you weekly run reps in the trenches and get honest feedback that you iterate on, and you do that over time, you will be a transformationally different person 6 months from today.
Awesome. Well, Bob Ewing, by the way, ewingschool.com. It's great to have you as always. We'll have you back. Ladies and gentlemen, if you've been part of the Fundraising Tips series, we've been covering storytelling. We'll be wrapping that up soon. If you're not on the tips list, you can subscribe easily. Just go to the TenXStrategies.com website. That's TenXStrategies.com. We're going to start soon on fundraising strategy and how that should guide your actions as well. But this is terrific, and you're getting lots and lots and lots of shout-outs, Bob. I don't know if you see that in the chat.
Oh, yeah, I just pulled them out. Thank you.
As always, it's a great pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Thank you, Kevin, for having me.
Well, thanks for joining us for today's 10X Strategies webinar. I hope you found this valuable, and please take advantage of these resources as much as is helpful to you. Check out our website, 10xstrategies.com. That's TenXstrategies.com. Sign up for the free weekly fundraising tip if you're not already there, and you're welcome to share these resources with others, including a recording of today's program. We're all about helping you get to the root causes of the problems in society with the solutions that you offer, but to transform your effectiveness by 10xing your fundraising. Thanks for being with us today, and hope to see you again soon.